While there are many things that catch passengers out once actually in Alaska, I want to first highlight something that trips up many cruisers before they go, including, as I'm going to talk about, my really good friends Graham and Pete. Now, after they'd watched videos about my last trip in Alaska, they booked a cruise on Norwegian Bliss. They excitedly told me they were going to visit the ports that I'd suggested, and also had built in some scenic sea days cruising glaciers, also as I had recommended. However, they had fallen into a classic Alaska cruise line trap. When I looked at their itinerary, I noticed that while they were calling on three key ports, Juneau, Skagway and Ketchikan, they were in them for at most 4 hours each. They arrived so early in the morning that their exploring time was like 2 to 3 hours in reality. On the way back to Seattle, for example, they also were in Victoria for just 3 hours, but from 8 o'clock at night. And even worse, when they were doing scenic cruising, they were not doing them in the best glacier regions. Now, if they'd chosen a different cruise at the same time and the same price, like ones I've done, for example, a Majestic Princess or New Staten Dam, they would have had all day in the ports and seen the better and must-see glaciers, including things like Hubbard Glacier and those in Glacier Alley. Too many cruises, and this is something you need to watch out for, get caught out by focusing on the itinerary map, and they don't closely examine enough the actual time spent in each port. It's something that constantly catches travelers out, and so they don't get the maximum Alaska experience. Luckily, we had time to sort that issue out for them, and I got them to change to a cruise that would absolutely do all the things they needed to do. Next, I had to make sure they did not get caught out on sightseeing itself. Here, I had what may seem to be contradictory watch-outs and advice, as you will see. First of all, I pointed out there are many great things they could do in Alaska ports that the cruise line would sell them as tours, but many they did not need the cruise line to do. By relying on the line, they would lose flexibility and add unnecessary cost. Here's a couple of examples in those three most visited ports where I warned them they could be caught out using line tours. In Ketchikan, the Great Alaskan Lumberjack Show is a really fun thing to do, and the cruise line would sell it as an excursion. But all that means is they literally walk them across to it and seat them in an allocated area. However, they could actually just buy tickets online or at the venue for significantly less. It's about $37 for adults and $18 for kids at the time of recording. It's a short and well signposted walk from where their ship would dock. In Skagway, the line would absolutely sell excursions on the, in my view, must-do White Pass and Yukon Railway. It's a great experience, but again, they can book tickets on any of the departures for much less. It's about $142 for adults, about $71 for kids. The cruise line tour would involve them walking to the train, which admittedly often departs really close to the pier where the ship will dock, but that's it. The publicly booked ones usually depart from the station, which is also really close to where the ships dock anyway. In Juneau, instead of a cruise line tour up the Gold Belt Mount Roberts tramway, which does give you stunning views at 1,800 feet above the city, they could just book tickets online right there. It's right on the main pier, and they could then ride whenever they wanted to. Cruise line excursions to view the Mendenhall Glacier 40 miles from Juneau are popular but costly and would again often limit their time at the glacier, sometimes to as little as 20 to 40 minutes. So instead, I suggested they use things like the local Capital Transit buses. It'll cost $2 each way, but it is an hour bus ride and a 30-minute, 1.5 mile walk. I suggested they could also use things like the Blue Bus Glacier Express. That would cost about $45 return, taking them right to the visitor center from the parking outside the tramway. I told them they can buy tickets from sites like Viator or Expedia, or simply at the booth dockside. I warned them to not get caught out booking things where the cruise line is not really adding very much value, but to book those alternatives in advance, because they often will sell out on port days. So that's an important watch out. However, for some excursions, I told them they would get caught out by not booking cruise line excursions. Let me talk about that. If Graham and Pete are planning to do some of the more scenic and exotic excursions in Alaska, like float planes, or like I've done helicopter excursions up onto glaciers for dog sledding or walking, then even though cost is really important to them, I know, I suggested they could get caught out making potentially bad choices just because of money. Now these are expensive excursions. They cost several $100s and are, though, potentially much higher risk than any other excursions they're going to do. The cruise line will have done a lot of research. They'll have locked up some of the top-notch providers based on their years and years of experience in Alaska. While excursion accidents are very rare in Alaska, they do happen. I mentioned to them that this was brought home to me with a really tragic accident in 2021 when guests of Holland America New Amsterdam booked their own float plane excursion out of Ketchikan, and where unfortunately they were killed when it crashed. So with these more expensive and exotic excursions, I personally use and rely much more on the cruise line expertise and history. But I told them if they still preferred not to and wanted to book in port, which they can really easily do because there are many booths selling excursion stocks up when they get off the ship, to do some extra checks before they actually confirm and book. So for example, they could simply Google the provider, check their reviews on TripAdvisor or Cruise Critic, just use their phone on the port side and check it. Or they could also, before the trip, ask in their cruise roll call on Cruise Critic if anyone has a great experience or recommendations for providers that they felt were really safe and were impressed with. I do think you need to be extra cautious on those ones. Now next, knowing they're big souvenir buyers on their trips, I had to warn them about not getting caught out here. There are several ways I've seen Alaska cruisers fall into traps that part them with way more cash than it should. And it all starts on board the ship with the support of the cruise line itself. Every Alaska cruise I've been on has port shopping advisors on board. They run talks, they provide coupons, they give maps of the shops to go to. Now, they're not employed by the cruise line, they're not unbiased, nor recommending the best quality or value stores necessarily. In fact, they work for promotion companies like Onboard Media and PPI Group, and they earn commissions by pushing us cruise passengers to shop in very specific Alaska port stores like Diamond International and Effie Jewelry stores, Del Sol color changing clothes, and so on. Now, these stores also pay hefty fees to the cruise lines to be included in these programs that you get given on the ship. Investigation by the Huffington Post, for example, reported stores in Alaska pay several $100,000 every year to be included. I warned them that in their cabin on embarkation day, they may find, like I did, discount vouchers, free charms to start collecting with the promise of more free ones when they go and visit those very specific stores. But they need to remember they're designed to get us and get them to visit stores which may not be the best value, and they all have highly skilled salesmen, really well trained, to pressure and manipulate us, I feel, into buying jewelry, watches, diamond, clothes, and not always at the sharpest and best prices. So I said if they're going to follow the advisor's suggestions and wanted to avoid getting caught out, at least they should double check the prices online to see if it's really a good deal before buying. Just check, do a quick Google search or whatever. The next area I see Alaska cruisers getting caught out shopping in port is focusing on the big souvenir shops that are close to the docking area. Now, some reports say they're owned by the lines, but I absolutely couldn't confirm that. But they do seem to be chains and not owned necessarily by local Alaskans. So what I suggested to Graham and Pete, they should try and really support the community they're calling on to look, therefore, for locally owned stores, often selling the same or very similar items. Now, local stores proudly advertise it on their signs or windows, and so they're normally pretty easy to find. Though I did warn them, it may mean heading a block or two back from kind of those really clustered as they get off the ship. They tend to be more of the chains. This brought me to tell them about another way cruisers get caught out when shopping for souvenirs and taking back something to remind them of their Alaskan trip. Most of the merchandise in the stores are mass-produced items. They're made abroad in places like China and have almost no link to Alaska itself. I told them as they called into different ports, they would see the same item with just the port name changed. So instead, what I suggested is when shopping, I recommended they look for items with the silver hand and the Made in Alaska logos. These are controlled to ensure they're authentic Alaskan goods. When buying, I pleaded that they don't get caught up in the kind of smoke and mirror promotions that the stores run so cleverly. be skeptical of the deep discounts of kind of so-called usual selling price, which is just kind of made up. The multi-buys, like buy 3 t-shirts for the price of 2, and other tricks of the trade. I admit I have been caught out buying more mugs, t-shirts, and candy than I needed, thinking it was a good deal. It really wasn't. I did stress that to not get caught out overall, to remember that in Alaska, there are only a few ports. It's a short season, and so they're all focused on and actually being developed to separate us from as much money as possible. Skagway, for example, has just over 1,000 permanent residents, but it explodes when cruise passengers are there. So Graham and Pete should be ready for tourist trap venues. Not to say that they're not going to have a good time in them, but venues close to the port, in all of the ports, like the bars and restaurants, are crowded, costly, and often actually just there manufactured for the tourist trade. For example, in Juneau on the dock front, there are often long lines for places like Tracy's Crab Shack, but a 10 minutes walk away in a quieter, more local part of town, like where the float planes land and take off, I've told them you'll find more authentic restaurants like Alaska Fish and Chips, where I had the absolute best fish and chips I've had for a long time anyway. The Red Dog Saloon is really popular. It's one of the more famous places to go in Juneau. However, the original Red Dog Saloon is long gone. It was a couple of blocks away. So while they'll go there, they'll find it packed, it's popular, there's a real buzz. It's very much about creating a place for passengers like Graham and Pete to have a good time and take a big slug of their money. So just be a little bit cautious. Graham and Pete then threw a bit of a curveball. They discovered that the flights blew most of their budget, and they wanted to know how they could make the most of ports with little to no money. And to help do that, I suggested they watch this video where I talk about how to explore Alaska ports without breaking the bank. See you over there.